A lot of scholars would say that this Messiah in the Old Testament some of them would say he's never called a god.
We see where that phrase in the last days comes up. That points us to these two poems. And one says that this king is going to be a man, and the other one says that this king is going to be God.
Yeah, that's right. Does this sound like the New Testament or what?
It does.
I mean, but it's here. It's here. I suppose it's easily missed if we're reading this with perhaps the wrong impression. A lot of us just think, oh, this text is about, it's about the history of Israel, which again, there's a sense where it is about that.
Right.
But there's a sense where it's about so much more.
Welcome to Open Scripture. My name is Nick Nail. I am a student and also a worship leader at a local church here in Wake Forest. With me is Dr. Tracy McKenzie, professor of Old Testament and Hebrew. And here at Open Scripture, we're seeking to sharpen the way the church reads her foundational texts or the scriptures. And we are in the middle of a conversation here in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, where we are drawing connections throughout the story, starting from the very first verse in the beginning. And then throughout, we can see that there's some, Tracy used the term hyperlinks throughout in the other 5 books through these poems to kind of give us a better understanding of what this book means. And one other illustration to use is a panoramic picture. Mm-hmm. So if we take all 5 books and we outline it like a panoramic picture, you can zoom in on a specific area and you can see someone, in a funny pose or something, but you zoom out, it's kind of hard to see what's going on there.
Good point.
So here we're zooming out to kind of get the idea. This is all one text. Yep. But then we're going to zoom in and we're going to see that there's some things that are happening throughout that you really can't really see until you zoom in. You got to
zoom in.
And we're zooming in even to the Hebrew language.
Yep.
All the way.
Yep.
And we're making it understandable and relevant, hopefully that we can all grasp what's happening here in the scriptures.
Yeah. I mean, if you remember in the last episode, we really began to unpack this idea of a king that we originally saw in Genesis 49, the first poem that was introduced by the last days. Mm-hmm. And Numbers 24 is the second poetry that contains the phrase in the last days.
So Genesis 49 was Moses was speaking.
Yep.
And not Moses.
Jacob
Jacob was speaking. And then by the time we get to Numbers 24, we have Balaam, who's a non-Israelite prophet.
Yep.
And he just got done talking to a donkey.
Right,
and now he's giving a prophecy based on the people of Israel, that he's looking down the mountain with his king, and they're seeing their enemy, Israel, scattered amongst them. And this is what he has to say about Israel.
Yeah, and what is interesting is we can then see the author step in, and we see the intelligent design of the author, his intentionality, because he basically cuts and pastes from this poem in Numbers 23, puts it in Numbers 24, not referring to Israel, but referring to this king who would come in the last days, who, by the way, is basically likened unto Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord. So, pretty powerful.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think was the most difficult for me to grasp when I first began to learn this way of reading, back when I was in seminary, and again, to be honest, it's probably the most difficult kind of transition for students that I'm teaching to read, is this idea where the author, we think of the biblical author basically as writing a newspaper article, or maybe he's writing a history, right? And so how do authors write? Well, how do we write? Well, we sit down and, maybe we start penning something, maybe we start, at 9 o'clock in the morning, we write for an hour, we stop for a coffee break, and we write some more, and we write some more. And we think that these ancient authors are operating the same way. But in reality, we're going to see when we get to Genesis 1 through 11, which is coming up next in our future episodes, we're going to see that the author is operating much differently. He's actually selecting these texts. He's got to select these texts around him. Maybe he wrote them earlier. Maybe, again, they're pieces of literature that he's using. He's going to arrange them in a particular manner. He's going to adapt a few of those. He's writing. He's doing this all to give us this unified picture. And that's what we've really seen in the Pentateuch with these poems and with Genesis 1:1 and with this idea of cutting and pasting. I like to think of this, we could think of this as maybe a patchwork quilt, if that picture helps you, if you know what a patchwork quilt is. Another idea is like a mosaic. If you can kind of conceive of what a mosaic, the ancient mosaics, where you had these little tile pieces that an artisan would grab and arrange in a particular manner, that's really what the author is doing. He's picking up these pieces of texts. He's cutting and pasting some. He's doing all of this to give us this very intentionally crafted, unified, what we could call book.
Yeah, and very intentional to the point where last episode we talked a lot down to pronouns, and even in our English versions we see some differences between the use of those pronouns.
Yeah.
And so some of those were maybe not accurate to the Hebrew text.
That's right.
And that's how deep we're getting.
Yeah, we're getting that deep, and again, love all of the abundance of English versions we have. It's such a great gift, and the church has not always had that. And so, again, always use all of these English versions. And again, where you happen to see them diverge, there's kind of maybe a problem, or there's ambiguity, or there's an issue that would require further study. And to a certain degree, we're unpacking that in these texts. Yeah. In these texts. So you ready to go on Numbers 24?
Yeah.
All right. So this time we are starting. We could start in verse 14, just so the audience can hear this phrase, the last days, again, if you want to pick it up at 14. And then I'm going to let you go ahead and read. Make sure you say in the last days rather than future. I'm going to let you read 15 and 16, and then I'm going to make a couple comments.
Got it. So Numbers 24:14. Now I am going back to my people, but first, let me warn you what these people will do to your people in the last days.
All right, I got to interrupt you, Nick. It's so hard not to jump in on this. I just can't not, because this is, again, so similar to Genesis 49 and Jacob's introduction. And I just got to say, we see, again, the repetition here. This is another big thing that you can pick up on as a reader if you're reading in these texts, because here we have Balaam, basically command an audience to warn them what would happen in the last days. And Jacob did that exact same thing. He commanded an audience, and he was going to tell them what would happen in the last days. So keep reading there.
In the last days. And then he proclaimed his poem, the oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes are opened, the oracle of one who hears the sayings of God and has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls into a trance with his eyes uncovered.
All right, very good. Interesting version there, falls into a trance. I'm going to have you get the ESV on that one. While you're doing that, I want us to note, or we can note for you out there in the audience, that these are, again, the exact repetition of verses 3 and 4, where Balaam started his poem there. There's one difference that I'm going to draw out here momentarily. But again, you might look back there if you can, and we'll put this up on the graphic. This would be a great graphic to show these two verses side by side with the one difference. Everything else is verbatim. All right, so let's hear the ESV. Maybe just read 15 and 16, Nick.
All right. And he took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with his eyes uncovered.
All right, very good. He sees a vision of the Almighty. And again, the major point I want to make here is, again, hopefully we have the graphic up here of these two texts side by side, because 3, he says the same thing. He lifted his proverb, and he said, the utterance of Balaam, son of Beor, utterance of the man whose eye is open. Verse 4, utterance of the one hearing the words of God, who, I'll read the Hebrew here, who envisions a vision. Right, he visions a vision of the Almighty, right? Same word here. And again, no surprise, this is what prophets had. He has a vision. And who's he have a vision of? He has a vision of literally Shaddai, right? So again, just to note this, same exact text, 3 and 4, as 15 and 16, with the exception of one additional element, which I'll say here in a moment. Now, if we're reading along in verses 3 and 4, and we read this, we think, oh, well, okay, I guess Balaam here is hearing the words of God. He's having this vision of the Almighty. It's like, okay, who is God and who is the Almighty? Well, it's God. Right? I mean, it's God. You say, well, what God? And I say, well, it's the God who brought them maybe out of Egypt. And we would just think of this as God, right? Generic God, the God of Israel, we could say, possibly say, God the Father, something like this. So when we come over, first of all, now we've been through the first section of poetry, and we read about this king.
Yeah.
The idea of the king was introduced. We know this king is likened unto God, unto Yahweh. And we said that he's going to do damage, come in the last days and do some damage. So now when we pick it up in verse 15 and we hear the exact same thing, at first we're thinking, okay, utterance of Balaam, son of Beor, utterance of the man whose eye is opened, utterance of the one who hears the words of God. And at this point we're thinking, okay, this is just the words of God.
Yeah.
Right? But look at the new piece of information right after, here's the words of God. So it's like it's sandwiched in, right? If you think of a hamburger, right? And if you think of the bottom bun as the utterance of the one who hears the words of God, the top bun is the one sees, or has a vision of the Almighty. He envisions a vision of the Almighty falling down, eyes uncovered, right? That's the top bun. What's the meat in the middle here that the author inserts right here that's not in verses 3 and 4? Knows knowledge, right? That's the Hebrew, right? Probably the CSB probably says has knowledge. Has knowledge of the Most High.
Now this says has knowledge from the Most High.
All right, get your CSB or get your ESV. We're gonna have to do some work on the versions here.
CSB. And knows the knowledge of the Most High.
All right, so there's no from here.
Not in ESV. So what? Of the Most High.
Okay, there's no of here, right?
There's no of or from.
Knows knowledge about the Most High or of the Most High, but not from the Most High.
Not from.
No,
okay.
There's no from here.
Got it.
Right? He knows knowledge about the Most High, what the ESV says.
Got it.
Okay? So now we can say, oh, wow, who is the Most High? And, we might not know for certain yet, but again, it's a question we need to be asking because the author, again, we see this idea of intelligent design or intentionality because we know the exact same phrases in verse 3 and 4 here. Everything is exactly verbatim, letter for letter, the same. So here we can see he has inserted this phrase. Now we can ask, well, who is the Most High? And, we know who the Most High is. We could say God. We could even say Jesus, from the New Testament. But in Genesis chapter 14, where Abraham meets Melchizedek, both Abraham and Melchizedek proclaim that Yahweh is the Most High, creator or acquirer of heavens and earth.
So he's also called Most High there.
Yeah.
And Melchizedek, just like Balaam, is not an Israel.
That's right. That's right. We don't know much about Melchizedek. He's like this person who has, in the text, and this is what I think the author of Hebrews says, he's a person without beginning and without ending.
But he calls God the Most High.
He calls God, who basically made the heavens and the earth, or, I think possessor or acquirer of heavens and earth. He says that's Yahweh.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, here, Balaam is saying, oh, the words of God, he hears the words of God, and he has knowledge about this Most High. All right, so he knows something about this Most High. So that's the main idea of this episode, is we're going to learn more about who this king is. All right, so we kind of got to keep this in mind here. I'm going to say that this Most High is none other than the king whose kingdom is going to be exalted, who's the seed of Abraham, the son of Judah, the star from Jacob. We're going to see that momentarily. Okay, but this was the first kind of thing we need to notice here, because we see real intentionality of this insertion that the words of God here, he knows knowledge about this Most High. He sees a vision of this Almighty because his eyes are uncovered.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, with that, we can move on to verse 17, unless you have any other qualifications there.
No, let's go.
All right,
17. I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near.
All right, very good. Let's just, for the fun of it, let's hear the ESV. It should be about the same.
I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near.
All right,
basically
Basically the same. Now, this is going to be very interesting, because we could ask the question, who is the him?
Yeah.
And if you read this with verse 16, who's the him?
The Most High?
Most High. Right?
So we're back to pronouns.
Yeah, back to pronouns. That's right. Here we have the third masculine singular pronoun again, right? So we're looking for what we call the antecedent. That's the noun which the pronoun's referred to. All right? You guys are going to know English by the time we get done with this. But so, again, very purposefully, the added clause in verse 16 has changed our understanding. We're now not merely thinking of God, kind of like this nebulous or maybe this ambiguous God or kind of generic God. I hate to call it the God who, brought Israel out of Egypt, kind of generic, but that would be the idea, right? Which we are thinking in verse 3 and 4. Now we know it's the Most High, and now Balaam is saying, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. So again, he's literally seeing this Most High, who is called God, by the way, and is called Shaddai, the Almighty, another name for God in the Pentateuch. Right? Now, what is interesting, if you'll permit me, one more flip back to the poem in Numbers 23:9 here. I want you to see something, and it'll be interesting what the CSB does here. Verse 9 of 23. Now, this was part of the story earlier that I told you. Balaam and Balak had seen Israel. They were up in the hills, and basically the number of Israel's dwellings, or their number of Israel's people, scared Balak to death. And so he hires Balaam to come curse Israel. So 23, verse 9, Nick.
I see them from the top of rocky cliffs, and I watch them from the hills.
All right. So very good. So here he's using these exact same verbs and pronouns, to be honest. I see him or them from the top of the cliffs or whatever, and from the hills I behold them. But now over here in chapter 24, verse 17, he's not saying I behold them. He's now saying,
him.
I see him, but not now and not near.
That's very interesting.
So again, a specific contrast to seeing the nation of Israel, because he is seeing the nation of Israel right before them, but he's not seeing this Most High. Why not? He's not going to come until the last days. All right? Wow. So again, the addition of this Most High, the insertion of this Most High, is very important. Specifically, not Israel. It's this third masculine singular king who's going to come in the last days. All right, the rest of verse 17 here.
A star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will rise from Israel.
All right, let me just stop you right there. We still have a couple more clauses, but this is, again, two important clauses here. First of all, you have this star from Jacob. And we could say, oh, what is the star from Jacob? And interestingly enough, this star from Jacob treads. What did yours just say there?
A star will come.
Will come. Okay. What about the ESV? I'm curious with the ESV, because this is not your kind of generic come. This idea here is he's marching.
A star shall come out
Shall
of
come.
Jacob.
Very interesting. So the idea here is, like I said, the idea of marching. Now, this is one of the reasons why, people at the time of Jesus were not expecting a suffering servant. Now, they should have been if they were reading the book of Isaiah, but because they were reading the Torah of Moses, this book that we're reading right now, they were expecting a ruler who would defeat the enemies of Israel, i.e. Rome, right? And this star treading, this is like a march. They thought this star was going to be marching in battle array. And again, this is actually one of these texts that's picked up from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, these important scrolls that were 2,000 years old, 2,200 years old, really, in the environs of the Dead Sea. They picked up on this verse right here, the star from Jacob. And they're talking about how it meant the Messiah, and they were expecting a ruler who would defeat basically Israel's enemy, and even, again, enemies within Israel that they were against. So this is a very messianic little clause right here. Now, we could think of the star from Jacob biblically. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you think about it, in the promise to Abraham, Abraham was told by the Lord that his seed would be as numerous as the stars of the heaven and the sand which is on the seashore. So this really could be a reference, again, to the seed of Abraham.
Right.
So no surprise, we've got Judah, we've got Jacob, and now we have this star who's going to march from Jacob.
And is he going to march and then come and destroy like the ox in the china shop type of thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So again, a little bit different picture than what we normally conceive of Jesus, right? And so Jesus, in his coming as an infant and coming as a dying, suffering servant, again, the world looks at that and sees maybe failure or weakness. God looked at that and in the resurrection and in the dying and in the atonement saw strength and the defeat, if you will, of the enemy, Satan, and all of, again, the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places, Paul would say.
Yeah.
So, and then again, he's still coming.
Yep.
And his coming, for those who don't believe, is condemnation. All right. Now, very quickly, the next clause, I just want to point out, a scepter will arise from Israel. This is the exact clause we saw from Genesis 49:10.
More king stuff.
More king stuff and another hyperlink.
Yeah.
All right. Now, the rest of these clauses all convey really the same idea. I'm going to let you read the end of verse 17 and 18. I'll even let you read verse 19, and then I think we can summarize and pick this back up later.
So a star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel. He will smash the forehead of Moab and strike down all the Shethites, or sons of Seth. Edom will become a possession. Seir will become a possession of its enemies, but Israel will be triumphant. One who comes from Jacob will rule. He will destroy the city's survivors.
All right, very good. So again, what's going to happen? Israel is going to conquer its enemies. This king, really, this one from Israel, this one from Jacob, who is going to rule, is going to rule all of the enemy nations around them, and they're going to be a possession of this king. So again, there's a lot of biblical theology we could go into here about how those nations who become a part of Israel are blessed because now they have the Lord as their God. And again, so you get this idea of possession that is a blessing, and you also get this idea of dispossession. Some of the versions read dispossession here because, again, the Lord will judge those who hate him or those who curse him, and it's going to be a blessing for those who bless him.
And those who decide not to, well, those who reject him, then total destruction.
Yeah, destruction. Again, the idea here of the nations is destruction.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we could talk about what that means individually.
Yeah.
But that would take us a slightly different direction. But the pictures that we get here in this poem, it's the same picture that we saw earlier in the last episode where he's literally eating his nations. He's consuming the nations around him. He's gnawing their bones.
That's pretty gruesome.
Pretty gruesome. And here we get a slightly different idea, slightly different language, same idea, where he's going to be victorious. He's going to be conquering, like a king would who's marching. So again, back to this idea of a king who has a kingdom who is defeating the nations around him. Now, Nick, just for a second here. I mean, again, think about this. We said from episode 1 that the king, who was the seed of Judah, was a human.
Yep.
Right? Because he's literally from Judah. Right? So he is a man, again, a descendant of Abraham, again, a man from the tribe of Judah. That's who this king is. Now, in Numbers 24, we see something quite different. Because in Numbers 24, the last episode, we saw that this king is likened or described in the exact terminology that Jehovah, Yahweh, the Lord, was described as he brought Israel out of Egypt. But now look at what this Balaam is saying. He's literally calling him God. Here's the words of God, knows knowledge of the Most High. I see him, but not now. So here, this star from Jacob is the Most High.
Wow.
Literally the same word that Yahweh, Jehovah, is described in Genesis 14.
Yeah. So let's go back to Genesis 1. So Genesis 1, in the beginning, when we read that, when a lot of people read in the beginning, they're thinking of, now we're going to read about the 6 days of creation, and that's totally fine. But you're saying there's a little bit more happening here. So when you read that phrase, in the beginning, we should tie it to the phrase, in the last days.
Yep.
And so now when we see where that phrase, in the last days, comes up, that points us to these two poems. And one says that this king is going to be a man, and the other one says that this king is going to be God.
Yeah.
So when we read in the beginning, it should point us to, hey, there's a last days coming.
Yep.
And then those last days, you're going to have a man who is both, or a king who is both man and God.
That's right. That's right. Does this sound like the New Testament or what?
It does.
I mean, but it's here. It's here. And, it's easily, I suppose it's easily missed if we're reading this with perhaps the wrong impression, about what the text is about. And again, a lot of us just think, oh, this text is about, it's about the history of Israel, which again, there's a sense where it is about that.
Right.
But there's a sense where it's about so much more.
Way more.
Now, I wanted to piggyback on something you just said right there, because you mentioned the 6 days of Genesis 1.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you recall this, and again, I want to bring this up again here, but I said the word Bereshit, right? The word Reshit. Remember, Ba is in, and Reshit is the beginning. I said that word has a relationship with 3 different contexts. Mm-hmm. So the author's using it very intentionally. It has a relationship with Genesis 1. It has a relationship with the so-called book of Genesis, what we think of as the book of Genesis because of Genesis 49.
Yeah.
And it has a relationship to the entire Pentateuch, right? Because again, the next poem that we're going to talk about in the next episode is Deuteronomy 33. And again, so we can see here that this word Bereshit has this relationship with three contexts. Each one of those is important. But in the book of Genesis, the so-called book of Genesis and the Pentateuch, the relationship has to do with this king who would come in the last days.
Wow.
Yeah. So I can't really stress how significant this is. And I think there's a certain sense where, I'm just going to be honest, perhaps this is unusual maybe to read it this way. A lot of scholars would say that this Messiah in the Old Testament is, some of them would say he's never called a God. And we could go to several texts where that would be in error, but this is one of those that I think people fail to recognize, that this star from Jacob is literally called God. He's called Shaddai, El Shaddai, God Almighty, and he's called the Most High, the same name for the Lord in Genesis 14. So again, I talk to my students a lot of times. I'm like, do you recognize the significance or the importance of this for doctrine in who our view of Christ is?
Right. And then anytime we think about the messianic terms in the Old Testament, it's really easy to point out this stuff in like Isaiah or Jeremiah or something. But we're going all the way back to the Pentateuch.
All the way back.
And it's the Messiah is there.
Messiah is here, and the Messiah is both man and he is God. And in theological terms, we talk about this as the dual nature of Christ.
Right.
But here it is, right here in Numbers 24. Unfortunately, you have to know nouns and pronouns to get this, but pretty fascinating.
Yep.
Well, listen, next time we look at Deuteronomy 33, the next poem, which is introduced by In the Last Days. I want to tell you, it's going to be a doozy. You won't want to miss it. But join us next time where we show how the Bible is for you and about you.